Good morning. It's good to see everyone here today. It's certainly good that we can gather together and worship our God. In fact, we have a lot of visitors here, and we're so thankful that you're here. Our goal at Broadmoor is to give God glory and honor and praise in all that we do, so we're glad to be here. I've been encouraged so far this morning. I appreciate those that have led in worship. I appreciate the songs that we are able to sing, so it's been good to be here. I hope to add to that by looking at God's Word and providing a message from His Word. What do you think of when I say the word consume? Consume. We use that word in a few different ways. In fact, I asked my family a slightly different question. What does it mean to be a consumer? Consumer. It actually gave me some things that I hadn't thought about. Naomi, who is studying hard at school, she said, well, producers and consumers, thinking about science. That is not where my mind first went. And so she had to explain to me, well, plants are producers, and you got animals and people are consumers. They eat things. I think of eating. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. And I'm even more aware of that with a son who's not quite a teenager, but he's trying to eat like one. In fact, I see that we have Isaac with us here this morning. I have to tell a little story on Isaac. One of my memories of Isaac is we were climbing up Mount LeConte, and we went, I don't know if it was the Pancake Pantry or a place to eat breakfast that morning. I could not believe how much probably a 16-year-old, 17-year-old Isaac could eat. He could consume a lot of food. He was a growing boy. I guess he still is. When I think about consuming, I think about eating, being a consumer. We use that language for more than just eating. Sometimes we think about being a consumer is taking products. There are products that are sold, and so we are all consumers. We are the ones taking that product. Consuming really deals with taking something that we then do away with. So food we obviously take into our bodies, we do away with it, or we may consume products. What happens though, or is it often that we think about the fact that we can be both a consumer and the consumed? We often think about the fact that we are taking other things in, food or other products in, and doing away with those. But what happens when we are both the consumer and the consumed? I'd like to talk for just a few moments this morning about the fact that jealousy consumes the heart. And I'd like to look at the life of Saul. And I believe it's a cautionary tale of someone that became consumed. His life was all about jealousy and something that he couldn't have. I think that Saul reminds me of the passage from James chapter 3 and verse 16 about as much as anyone. There it says, where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. I think that pretty well sums up Saul's life as he was consumed with jealousy. Jealousy is a feeling of resentment or bitterness or even hostility that we would feel towards someone that has something that we want, or they have something that we don't have. They may never display hostility toward us. The fact that they have it is enough for us to be upset and angry. They have it and we don't. It's almost like we invent a rivalry in our minds where we are competing and our worth hangs in the balance. We want what they have. Proverbs 14 and verse 30 says, a tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. A similar statement was made by a Greek philosopher named Antisthenes. He said, as iron is eaten away by rust, so the envious are consumed by their own passion. When we look at the life of Saul, we see a man that was consumed by jealousy. We're given a preview of this even before Saul was able to have his heart directed toward David and consumed with jealousy with him. We see in chapter 16 and verse 13. This happens right after David was anointed. And there it says, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. Now in 1 Samuel chapter 16, this comes after Saul's great demise, where he made a presumptuous or a hasty offering, and the end of his kingdom was announced. We see in chapter 15 that he was given a task of wiping out the Amalekites, and he refused to do that, or he stopped short of obedience. And then the kingdom was further taken from him as an individual. So Saul had set up a heart that was contrary to God and his purposes. And so we see that God said in chapter 15 that he was going to choose a man after his own heart. Saul doesn't know the identity of that individual, but we see that in chapter 16, that is the man David, or the boy David. In chapter 16 and verse 13, it says, the Spirit rushed upon David. But notice what it says about Saul. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. Saul dealt with bouts of, if I might try to understand this, he dealt with bouts of anger, depression, rage. It was his spirit that was tormenting and harmful. He had turned away from God, and he was dealing with the mental anguish and pain of that decision. We see further that David becomes the forefront of his mind in chapter 18 and 19 of 1 Samuel. In fact, this passage goes back and forth between David and his success and how he accomplishes great things, and all of the people love David. And then Saul's response to that, and how Saul responds with jealousy. In fact, notice with me in chapter 18 and verse 5, or verse 6. Chapter 17 tells us about David's mighty defeat of Goliath. So that's the background for what we're about to read. Verse 6, it says, and as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry. And this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. He looked upon him with suspicion, as another translation reads. Verse 10 says, the next day a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. First thing to notice about this passage is that the women came out and they were celebrating a victory. It says they even came out to celebrate Saul. They said that he's won a victory. After all, the Israelites had defeated the Philistines thanks to David and his actions, but it was still a victory that Saul was able to partake in. But was Saul able to focus on the victory or the celebration? No, he says, I'm slighted. Someone has done better than me. Saul's not able to even think about what he has gained and the victory that he has. But here he becomes consumed with jealousy. And isn't that how jealousy works? It's not that we don't have things or have blessings or have things that are going well for us. It's that we look and find that one thing that we don't have. And we're upset about that one thing. Someone else has that, and we want it. And so we see jealousy takes over the life of Saul, so much so that when David succeeds, Saul sees that as a personal affront to himself. And he takes a spear and tries to kill David. What has David done to Saul? Nothing but won a victory for him. But Saul turns his jealousy and his envy and his anger, and he tries to kill David. In chapter 18, as we continue on into the chapter, we see once again David is successful wherever he goes because the Lord is with him. David is gaining victories. David is being successful. All the people love David. And notice what Saul does next as he becomes consumed with his own jealousy. He has the blessings of a wife, Ahinoam, and his daughters. We see Merab and Michal in chapter 18. And instead of thinking about the love that he has for his daughters or the benefit that they might come, what does he say when it comes to his daughters? I know, I can use my daughters to bring the downfall of David. And so he takes his own daughter and he promises her in marriage to David. That seems to be his initial idea, and he recants on that, and he takes Merab, his firstborn, away from David, doesn't allow him to marry, but he continues with his scheme there with Michal. He says, you don't have to pay me any money for a bride price. In fact, if you would bring me 100 foreskins of Philistines, then that will be the price. You see, Saul wants David to go and fight 100 Philistines. That surely will mean his downfall, right? And he's using his own daughters in this scheme to bring about David's downfall. David, though, is successful. He brings him 200 foreskins of Philistines. And that enrages Saul even more. You see, as he's consumed with his jealousy, it seems to be backfiring. He seems to be going down in a downward circle or trend, a cycle away further and further from God and from happiness and true joy. Saul is consumed with jealousy. The account ends again with David saying that he smites the Philistines with a mighty blow. And then Saul again acts in anger and tries to kill him once again. Do you see how jealousy consumes the heart? Really, the rest of 1 Samuel there's little that's mentioned that's not about Saul being consumed with jealousy. In fact, from here, David becomes wise to Saul's plans. He flees from Saul and from his court. And the rest of the book is about Saul pursuing David, trying to capture him. In fact, we see that Saul pursues David at his home, and that's where Michal is. He's married Michal. Michal helps him escape. Then he pursues him to Ramah, where Samuel the prophet is. There had been a break in the relationship between Samuel and Saul after Saul's sin. And so Samuel had been an advisor, had been a prophet there that had worked with Saul. And now David is seeking his safety there with Samuel. Then he goes to Gibeah, and that's where the home base is for Saul and his son Jonathan. We've already seen earlier that Jonathan had made a covenant with David and an agreement. Now, Jonathan would have been the king that would have been in line there. But since the kingdom was taken away from Saul and his dynasty and his kids, we see that Jonathan doesn't react like his father with jealousy, but with love and kindness. And he extends that to David, and he helps him even in Gibeah to escape from Saul and his anger and rage. Saul has become so consumed that he's using the people that are closest to him to get at David. But again, that backfires. And they side with David and away from their father in his angry rages. We come to chapter 21, where we see that David is fleeing from Saul, and he comes upon Ahimelech the priest, and there he is given some bread, and apparently he inquires of the Lord through the priest there. Saul, though, says in chapter 22, and in fact, let's read verses 7 and 8. 1 Samuel 22 and verse 7. Notice what Saul says as he's setting about, thinking about, dwelling upon David. In verse 7, and Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, people of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, that all of you have conspired against me?" You know, it's hard for Saul to see any healthy relationship anywhere else because he feels like everyone is against me, because he's become consumed with David. "You're conspiring against me," he says to his own servants. "You didn't tell me about Jonathan and the covenant there." Notice as we go further that Doeg speaks up and says, "I know where David is. David is or has come through Ahimelech and talked to him." So notice what Saul says in verse 11, 1 Samuel 22 and verse 11. Then the king sent to summon Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. And Saul said, "Hear now, son of Ahitub." And he answered, "Here I am, my lord." And Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, and that you have given him bread and a sword and have inquired of God for him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait as at this day?" Ahimelech had even inquired about David and what he was doing there. He had understood David to be on a mission for Saul. He had no reason to be suspicious of what was happening there. But notice that Saul automatically reads into this the fact that everyone else is against me. Everyone has conspired against me. And he even says this to Ahimelech. What happens now is truly horrible and horrendous. As Saul in his anger says, "You're conspiring against me," and he puts all the priests to death. All those that wore the ephod, that inquired of God. Saul had become so consumed that it led him in a direction that was truly harmful to those around him and to himself. We see in chapter 23 through 26 that Saul continues his pursuit of David. In chapter 23, we see that David saves the city of Keilah from the Philistines. What's interesting about that is that should have been Saul's job. He should have been occupied with the enemy, but instead he was consumed with David. And so David delivers the city of Keilah after inquiring of the Lord. Saul's no longer able to do that, having killed all of the priests, and David saves the city of Keilah. Then we find two episodes in chapter 24 and 26 where Saul is pursuing David. He understands and believes that David is conspiring against him, lying in wait, but David is going to prove him wrong. In fact, David is able to sneak up on Saul and take a piece of his robe, and he presents that piece to him later and say, "I am not trying to kill you. In fact, I had an opportunity to put you to death, but that's not what I'm trying to do." Saul is convicted here. He apologizes and he even declares David's innocence. But what's interesting to me is that this doesn't happen just once, but twice. He seems contrite in the moment, but then he turns around and pursues David even again, so that in chapter 26, David has to sneak up again on him, get close, take his water bottle, and again prove to him, "I had an opportunity to put you to death, but that's not what I'm trying to do." Saul is a man that is consumed with jealousy. I'd like to suggest today that jealousy is destructive. We live in a society that is given to jealousy in many ways, don't we? We live in a materialistic society where people have a lot of possessions. We live in a place of wealth. And even with all of this wealth, we look around, we look to the side, and we see, I don't have everything that this person has. And sometimes that goes beyond money. I don't have the looks that they have. I don't have the friends that they have. I don't get to take the trip that they have. We also live in a society of curated images where we present ourselves as always having fun, and so we have to look at those images, or we force ourselves, or we take it upon ourselves to look at those images on a regular, ongoing basis. And if we ever forget to look at those images, we get a little ding and notification. Somebody's having fun out there. And we become consumed with jealousy. They have what I don't have. And we become hostile and upset against the world, against others, and our heart becomes consumed. I'd like to suggest as well that jealousy steals our joy. Think about King Saul and all of the blessings that he had. He was the king in the land, the highest office in Israel. In fact, he had been taken there from humble means. He wasn't one that had campaigned to become king, but he was chosen, and he had the highest office in the land. He had early successes with Israel, being able to take the Israelites and defend the city of Jabesh Gilead against the Ammonites, for example. And he had great success. He had a wife, children, a son, 2 daughters. There were a lot of things going for Saul. But was he able to enjoy any of his blessings? For all that he had, he was unable to focus on what is good in his life. And he focused on the one thing that he felt like he didn't have. And that's what jealousy does. It strips us of our joy. William Penn stated that the jealous are troublesome to others, but a torment to themselves. And isn't that true? When we're consumed with others, we are a torment to ourselves. And that reminds me that thankfulness is the enemy of jealousy and vice versa. It's hard to be thankful and jealous. In fact, we have to turn a blind eye to all of our blessings in order to be jealous. We have to train our minds to focus on the negative and overlook all of the positive. Jealousy is the enemy of thankfulness. When we are consumed by what we don't have, we can't be happy with what we do have. We may have a loving family around us, but we're jealous of the trip that this other person took. We may have a good job, but we're jealous of the person that got the promotion that we didn't get. We may have a house full of things, kind of like the stars of the sky. So many we can't even count the number of things that we have. But we don't have the newest gadget that they have. You see, jealousy consumes us. It steals our joy. It makes us miserable. And so, yes, we consume. We're the consumer, but we're also the one consumed by the actions of our heart. Not only that, but jealousy diverts our attention. It diverts our attention. As king of Israel, Saul's number one focus should have been on his enemy, the Philistines. In fact, they had been a continual thorn in the side of the Israelites, and they were causing problems, wreaking havoc upon Israel. Saul should have been focused on his job and what he needed to do, of building a strong kingdom, but he was consumed instead with David. That's what jealousy tends to do. There's many things that we have to do in life. There are many tasks that we have. But jealousy diverts our attention from what is good and right and the job that we need to do, the actions we need to take, and it causes us to focus on something that's peripheral, to the side, often something that we have no control over. As I mentioned, social media and screens fill us with jealousy. And the funny thing about that is we wish we could be on a trip. We wish we could be having fun. But we got our head down and looking. We actually could have more fun if our attention wasn't so diverted. We could be doing things that are good and beneficial, but we've become so focused on what everyone else has. You see, jealousy diverts our attention away from being productive, and it causes us to spin our wheels mentally over something that we can't have. Jealousy diverts our attention, and that's problematic. Not only that, but jealousy also twists our perceptions. And I'm going to add within this, probably should have made it a separate point, but it also destroys relationships. Saul questioned his men about their loyalty. He says, "You've conspired against me because my son showed kindness to David." Nothing wrong with that. But he says, "My men have conspired against me." And he even goes to the priest and said, "You've conspired against me." Saul was so twisted in his perceptions. And we can do that with others as well. When we perceive that they have something we don't want, we turn that hostility on them. We're suspicious of motives, of anything that they would do. It twists our perception of things. We see the world with dark-colored lenses. Everyone's against me. Everyone has things I can't have. And thus it destroys relationships. We want the downfall of someone else rather than seeking what is good and beneficial for ourselves. It destroys us from the inside out. Jealousy twists the truth. It twists our perceptions. And we see this with Saul. Proverbs 27 and verse 4 says, "The cruelty of wrath and the torrents of anger, but who can stand before jealousy?" There's a lot of damage that can happen from sins, but jealousy is something that can bring great destructive force upon other people at no fault of their own. From not doing anything. David had not done anything sinful towards Saul, but Saul perceived the world in this way and sought to do harm to David. Jealousy twists our perceptions. It may also suggest that jealousy turns us away from the Lord. Ultimately, Saul's heart, including his selfish obsession, turned him away from the Lord. In chapter 18 and verse 12, it says, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him. Sometimes we can even be jealous over someone's relationship with God. We can view them negatively and be hostile towards someone because they're doing what's right. That's what Saul does. And just because God was with David, he immediately took that as a slight against himself. God had done many things for Saul, was willing and desirous to be his God, to be with Saul, to help him in many ways. He had demonstrated that, and I believe that God would have continued to do that had Saul sought after him. You know, it's hard to be consumed with jealousy and be a child of God, because jealousy is a focus on self. It is seeing all things in the world around the lens of selfishness, what I want and what I can't have. And it's hard to be a child of God, a disciple who says that God is Lord of my life, and be jealous. Because the jealous person says, I'm Lord of my life and I want more. I want more. Jealousy seeks fulfillment in what others have, ultimately, and not in God. God is to be our ultimate fulfillment. Jealousy is completely destructive, and we need to be careful, be warned about the tendency that is so prevalent in our society and so prevalent in people's hearts. This is not new to our age. We're looking at someone that lived thousands of years ago, but it is prevalent, and we need to be watchful. Well, let me ask one other question. And that is, if jealousy is so bad and so sinful, why does the Bible say that God is jealous? Does that indict God of sin in somehow? Notice in Exodus chapter 20, when God brought the Israelites to Mount Sinai, when he gave the 10 commandments, he said in verse 5, "You shall not bow down to idols or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." We've seen the destruction of jealousy, so how does it say God is jealous? Moses, as he reflects upon that Mount Sinai event, says in chapter 4 and verse 24 of Deuteronomy, "For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God." There's a big difference between God's jealousy and our jealousy. In fact, we're often jealous in a selfish way about what we can't have. But notice that God's jealousy is defined within a covenant relationship. In fact, Hank Hanegraaff says this, and I thought it was a helpful quote. "When an exclusive covenant relationship is dishonored, sanctified jealousy is a passionate zeal that fights to restore that holy union." That makes sense to us, doesn't it? If you're in a relationship, a committed relationship with somebody else, and they were to go out of that relationship and seek someone else, we would feel a sense of jealousy because we desire that relationship to be together. Jealousy does not stem from God's selfishness, but rather his great love. God wants a relationship with us so much that he has a passionate zeal for that relationship. The Bible teaches that our God is consumed with a jealous love for each and every one of us. And I think it's a beautiful picture. In fact, jealousy really relates to the idea of zeal, and it's often how we direct our zeal. We can direct it in a negative way with jealousy so that we are zealous for getting what we don't have. Zealous and focused in that direction. But God is zealous and jealous for you and me. God seeks after us. And even as we look through the story of Israel, we see that Israel turned their back on God time and time again. Romans 5, as we read this morning, talks about the fact that we are enemies to God. But yet, through all of that, what has God done? I know what I would do. If someone harms me, we want to get them back. I'm going to harm them back. But that's not our God. In the face of sin, in the face of rebellion, in the face of repeated dishonoring of God, God has continued to pursue us. What an amazing thought. Let me see if I can remember. Amazing, magnificent, marvelous. I'm not good at quoting the song, but you get the point, right? That's the love that God has for us. It is so overwhelming. Let us focus on what we need to focus on. Instead of what everybody else has or how we might miss out on something, we have a great God who loves us and cares for us. In a world of dejection and loneliness and feelings of a lack of love all around, we have a God that loves us. If you're here this morning and you're not a child of God, I want you to know that God wants you to be. He wants you to be in relationship with him. He sent his son to die on the cross for you. If you would believe that Jesus is the Christ and repent of your sins and give your life to him, confessing Jesus as the Christ and being baptized into water for forgiveness of sins, you can be his child. What a glorious thought. And if you are a Christian today and you're not living as you should, be reminded of the simple truths, the foundational truths of God and his great love, and come back to him. Do what is right today. God is still inviting you back. If there's any subject to the invitation, please come as we stand and sing at this time.